All right. So here's a few words that were not in the reading, but are important. On the bridge, we talked about how the root of behavioral research, studying how people use places, came out of environmental psychology. And a lot of the techniques that people used to describe those behaviors are descriptive strategies based on observation. What you can see. So behavior mapping, if necessary, interviews and visual preference and other things. What these key phrases show are the next wave in behavioral research, right? So I'm just going to put those up and we'll talk briefly about them. Neuroscience, study of how your brain works, has really made tremendous strides from trying to find out how to deal with illnesses like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, development disabilities, and in the case of landscape architecture, things like attention deficit disorder or nature deficit disorder, which we'll talk about today. So neuroscience is starting to develop a different way of describing human behavior. In some cases it overlaps with what we know from environmental psychology. In some cases it's different. The first term is new. It was new to me too when I first learned about it, called epigenetics. Epi coming from epidemiology, right? Genetics. So in the old way of describing human behavior, you had this thing called nature versus nurture. For people who watch American football, and you've been following the news for the past few weeks, then you know that this is really on the minds of a lot of people, at least in our country, right? So a very famous football player to discipline his child in a way that was similar to how I was disciplined growing up. It was beaten with a switch, stemmed from a tree, but beaten so severely that they went to the emergency room. It's a 4-year-old child. And physicians called police to press charges and arrest this famous football player. And in his defense, he said, well, that's the only way you can really discipline a child, you know. And it's erupted into this firestorm of like, well, how do you instill discipline in children? Does physical violence do anything, even though it's a cultural norm in different parts of the world and different communities? So nature, right? You're born with characteristics, right? Nurture, the environment within which you grow, and it's a constant battle. The things that are innate within you as a human being versus what the environment enables or rewards you to do. Now, in the old days, this was primarily the area of genetics. Right? You're coded for it. You may have heard people say, well, you know, there's a fat gene. You can just turn that gene off. You're not fat anymore. You know, there's a smart gene. There's a stupid gene. You know, there's a tennis gene. There's an athlete gene. There's a book about this right now. In terms of like some people are genetically predisposed to be athletes, right? Within the environment that you're in, right? Here's the other side. This goes back to one of the people profiled earlier, Frederick Olmsted. That no, it doesn't matter what your potentials are born right out of the womb. What matters is where you develop. That has a bigger impact on it than this. So, for example, I have some friends who have children with learning disabilities. It was a big issue with them whether or not they should go to what's called a special school with other children who have learning disabilities, or whether or not they should just go to school with everybody else. You know, it'll be more difficult for them, but being in that environment will give them the tools to overcome the limitations that come from the genes. Right? So, Frederick Olmsted, I bring him up because Central Park was cited. One of the reasons why Central Park was so popular is because people were concerned about immigration in the United States at that time. Floods of people who were coming to America who weren't well educated, right? Who, in Olmsted's own words, weren't civilized. So one of the purposes of Central Park was to create an environment to civilize and socialize new people who were coming to America. How to walk, how to dress, how to preambulate, how to enjoy a space in the hope that it would transform their nature, and they would act like American citizens. John Dewey felt this as well. So if you're into library science or educational system, that's one of the reasons why we have a public education system in America. Why John Dewey was a big proponent of it was because he thought that that was the primary mission of school, not information and knowledge, but acculturation, civilization, so that we're all the same. So epigenetics is interesting because it adds a wrinkle to it. And this is what people say now. Well, no, actually, we do have all of these potentials, right? So in your DNA, you have all these potentials over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But even in the womb, as you're growing and gestating, the chemical balance within the womb, the environment with which you're in before you go out into the physical world, alters how those genes are expressed. Right? And there are really incredible studies now dealing with a topic called toxic stress. It's out of Harvard, which is to say that if the mother is under stress during gestation of the child, that stress transforms the genetic makeup of the child. The child grows and develops with the proteins and the hormones in the womb to adapt to a stressful environment. And over generations of sustained stress, and what does stress mean? Stress means I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. I'm afraid that this person is going to harm me or beat me or do me some bodily harm. Any kind of stress transforms into chemical reactions within the body, and that baby grows within that environment, and it diminishes the capacity of certain DNA. Over 2 generations, they're mapping lowered IQs. They're mapping more predispositions to things like alcoholism and other diseases because of the stress of a parent and a grandparent. Because of this epigenetic element. On the other side, if the mother is not in a stressful environment, right, eats the right foods, gets enough rest, tends to her needs, the right chemical balance, it creates more opportunities for a wider range of those genes to express themselves. So in an environment that affords many choices and decreases stress, even within the womb, more potential for your nature to come out. When you're under stress, less. And it's not just the genes, it's the brain. These are synapses. This is how your brain works. It's like a circuit board, electrical wires that connect to each other. So, when you're born, all of these are firing. All of these are orange. Okay? Because you don't have enough stimulation to make decisions about which parts of your brain you need programmed to do things, other than your involuntary functions. How you breathe, heartbeat, those kinds of things. But over time, you train your brain to do different things. Right? So, the example is, my college roommate, great tennis player. Wasn't born knowing how to play tennis. The guy played tennis like 6 hours a day, and he's supposed to be studying. That motor memory reprogrammed his brain so that the synapses, the connections that deal with hand-eye coordination, that deal with depth perception, that deal with motor control and balance, right? Everybody has those, but just like muscles, when you go to the gym and you exercise, your brain gets exercised too. And so the synapses that have nothing to do with those things go away and they break, and they stop using them. The ones that you do use strengthen and get stronger over time. This is a big deal with Alzheimer's research, for example, is how to rebuild the broken synapses in those decisions. But why is that important? Just like not using them and not exercising those muscles allows those to go away and alters your behavior, right? So you don't do certain things. You can train them and train your brain to adapt to new behaviors. One example, Ron Finn, gorilla guard in South Central Los Angeles. I'll let him speak for himself. He's hard to hear.
I live in South Central. This is South Central. Liquor store, fast food, vacant lots. So the city planners, they get together, they figure they're going to change the name South Central to make it represent something else. So they changed it to South Los Angeles. Like this is going to fix what's really going wrong in the city. This is South Los Angeles. Liquor store,